My comfortable semi-detached council-owned house is built on the site of a long-forgotten spring in the farmer's field, a spring around which gathered shawled women, cloth-capped and muffled men, and the boys sporting knickerbocker breeches, waiting their turn to collect water. Men curse guardedly at the unhurried trickle. Bored youngsters, forgetting their errand, leave miscellaneous receptacles unguarded to laugh about. Mothers wait patiently in the colliery-owned houses. Let us go back in time, back 4 generations to the middle of the 19th century and the birth of a colliery. And give the farmer his bloody field back, by Laurie Moran. The gig pulled up. 2 top-hatted, heavily dressed men stepped down and paced across the farmer's field. Many of import had gathered with Mr. Straker and Mr. Love to witness the brief ceremony. The year is 1856. Mr. Straker hails from Tynenow. Mr. Love resides at nearby Willington. They share colliery interests. A spade flashes. A neatly cut sword is removed. Cheers from the select group, well wrapped against the October weather, announce the birth of a colliery. Viscount Boyne VI of Bransford Castle died last year. He left his estate to his son, who became the 7th Viscount Boyne. Bransford estate covers a vast area. For those of a statistic mind, this tract of land embraces the parish of Bransford, Emlington Row, Stockley, Tudor and Willington. Viscount Boyne is reputed to be the 3rd largest landowner in the north. His farms and farmland cover some 15,310 acres. These yield an estimated yearly rental of over £74,000. This wealth is boosted by virtue of royalties accrued from mining operations in the area. Messrs. Straker and Love, capitalists and coal owners, have leased over 1/3 of the domain to work it for coal. Recent borings prove that the new colliery to be sunk at Brandon has no magnesium and limestone strata. A fairly easy downward passage is envisaged. Coal seams proved are the low main with coal 1 foot 8 inches thick, 57 feet from the surface. The Hutton with coal 2 feet 8 inches thick, 157 feet from the surface. The Harvey with coal 2 feet thick, 312 feet from the surface. The Busty with coal 4 feet thick, 418 feet from the surface. And the Brockwell with coal 2 feet 10 inches thick, 522 feet from the surface. The layer of Segal lies just below the Brockwell seam. This will be used for the manufacture of fire bricks. The shaft will be sunk to a depth of 542 feet 4.5 inches to allow for the installation of pumps and to provide a sump in which to collect pit water prior to pumping to the surface. The co-partners left the site, no doubt well satisfied that the findings suggest a long and successful partnership. Brandon is situated in the parish of Bransford, between the city of Durham and the Auckland Coal District. The village of Brandon, the birthplace of Treadgold, lies some 3 miles southwest of Durham. Thomas Treadgold, author of the steam engine, published in 1827, and other works, died in 1834. There are several named places entitled Brandon. There is South Brandon, nearby West Brandon, and East Brandon, the village on the hill. It is primarily an agricultural area. East Brandon, the largest of the 3, is a self-supporting community living in 25 houses. Brandon Colliery, as this new place is named, is 1 mile away on lower ground and will thus form a separate community. Sinkers are in demand as new pits are planned in various parts of the county. The sinkers' gear is set. They begin their downward drive, boring for coal. Their goal, the first seam of workable coal, the Hutton seam, which is coal 2 feet 8 inches thick, waiting to be worked. Joe Stanger, a master sinker imported from Northumberland, is in charge of 12 men, most of whom had learned the art of sinking from their fathers. They work in 3 shifts, which ensures continuous sinking. Joe wears a commodious leather hat with a long peak at the back. A large waterproof smock-like coat is strapped across his chest. These afford protection from the wet sides of the shaft as he descends. He wears clogs, these being light and hard-wearing. Shaft sinking is one of the most hazardous of jobs, as the sinkers line the shaft with steel sheets. Until recently, timber was used to shore the sides of the shaft. The lining or tubbing for the shaft is calculated to cost between £60 and £70 for each fathom sunk. The sinkers take pride in their highly skilled work. Joe Stanger's men earned 7 shillings per fathom for the first 5 fathoms sunk, 14 shillings for the second 5 fathoms, 21 shillings for the third 5 fathoms, and so on, 7 shillings extra for each successive 5 fathoms. Into 1857. Sinkers, as anxious as their masters, bore steadily downward. Buildings mushroom nearby. Blacksmiths, masons, joiners, all are busy. Cartmen lead stone and timber to the new site. Houses are built. The first row is 1 room down, 1 room up. The sinkers and their families are housed first. These buildings are said to have cost the colliery owners around £50 each to build. Builders are not obliged to provide drains and sanitation, but they are erecting netties across the street away from the houses. These netties are huddled in clusters of 4, 1 netty for each household. These are brick built with a tin roof sloping to the rear. Each has a sliding cast iron plate set in front, which when lifted facilitates emptying. Richard is a 59-year-old cartman born at nearby Sunderland Bridge, with other cartmen lead stone quarried at the top of the hill just approaching East Brandon. The heavy cart horses holding back swaying loads as they travel the incline down to the new colliery. The thick walls of the first houses to be built encase a floor made up of square qualls. Until quite recently, colliery houses had floors made from a mixture of lime, small coal and gravel. The fire range is large. There is an iron boiler at one side of the fireplace. A round oven is set at the other side. The boiler is filled with water collected from a spring in the farmer's field. Hinged wooden shutters are fitted over the downstairs windows, these being fastened back to the outside wall during the day. At night they are closed and secured from the inside. Among the first settlers are George Madgen and his wife Mary. George is a joiner. They took their new son to be christened George in the parish church of St. Brandon in the picturesque village of Branspeth. The Reverend A. Duncombe Shafto also baptised Jane Ann Snaith. The village has a new national school, which at 2 miles distance is the nearest school for the collier's children. The new railway line running from Durham to Bishop Auckland after 4 years of labour and tragedy was opened on April the 1st. Colliery workers, together with their wives and children, gathered on this important day, alongside the new railway track at Brandon. A train carrying officials of the North Eastern Railway Company is due to leave Durham at 2 p.m. It will travel through Raleigh, Langley, Brandon, Branspeth, Wellington and on to Bishop Auckland. Forgotten for the moment were the 8 men and boys killed and the numerous injured during the laying of the 2.5 mile stretch of line from Durham to Brandon Colliery. Women nervously clutch their shawls. Men puff on meerschaum pipes. Snub boxes click. Children, without success, try to control excited dogs. April the 1st, April Fool Day, a day to be remembered as the opening day of the Bishop Auckland Branch Railway. For most onlookers, this was their first view of a moving train. Here it comes. Margaret Hall, 9 years of age, Will Knighton, Junior, 7, Isabella Parkinson, 11, John Bell and John Coxon, both 10, and Mary Garbett, 6, with her 4-year-old sister Margaret, shout in chorus as the labouring train crossed the small bridge spanning the road running to Durham. Faces turn towards Langley. On time, 10 minutes past 2, the train noisily approaches Brandon Colliery. Livestock in nearby fields scatter in terror as the engineer, wind-blown, operates the engine whistle. Smiling, top-hatted men wave from carriage windows. The greetings are returned by the excited group lining the track. On its immediate return from Bishop Auckland, a public luncheon to celebrate the event is to be held in the new Town Hall, Durham. Tickets are 10 shillings and 6pence each. Huge balks have been erected near the shaft. These will support the heapstead. The new engine house contains machinery for winding the cage in the shaft. Modern pitch uses steel rope to draw the cage. Last year, 136 pitmen were killed in pit accidents in the Northern District, a number of them due to pit shaft mishaps. Greater safety measures are being sought. Coal owners and others, perturbed over loss of life in pit shaft accidents, welcomed experiments which took place in December 1848 when parachutes were attached to a pit cage which stopped the descent of a cage if the shaft rope broke. Again in 1850, when Ford Rinier's patent safety apparatus was given a trial. The idea being that if the cage rope snapped in the shaft, two arms would be released which would automatically bite into the sides of the shaft. Wooden tubes, a recent innovation, each built to hold 8.5 hundredweight of coal, are arranged in convenient heaps for dispatch below as required. Each four-wheeled tub is strongly built, having two iron bands bolted around its body for added strength. A most important feature is the boiler house, which produces steam to operate the winding gear. The railway station, the title is a misnomer as it is only a small building, is in use. It has been open 2 weeks. The parliamentary rate for train fares being 1 penny per mile. The colliery folk will no doubt use this swift and exciting mode of travel. Thomas Carter arranged to have his infant son christened George on the Saturday, as the trains do not stop at Brandon Colliery during the week, the baby being carried the quarter of a mile from Branspeth Station to St Brandon's. Farmland contracts as more houses are built to provide shelter for the expected surge of pitmen. More land is buried under spoil brought out of the shaft. Richard Issop lives at number 8 East Street. Besides leading stone from the quarry, performs other tasks. He cleans refuse from the netties which he dumps in the field lying north of the colliery. There being as yet no shops of Brandon Colliery, people travel to the market at Durham every Saturday. Potatoes currently costing 1 shilling a peck, eggs at 12 a shilling. Beef 7 pence halfpenny a pound, veal is 8 pence a pound. Chickens cost 1 shilling and 4 pence each. Coffee at 1 shilling and 2 pence a pound is more popular than tea, which is selling at 3 to 4 shillings a pound. Candles for use in the home and in the pit cost 11 pence halfpenny a pound. Whisky is 2 shillings and 6 pence a bottle. Guinness Dublin Stout is a good buy at 6 shillings for a dozen quart bottles. During August, a new winning was started at Brandon Colliery from the surface down to the Hutton seam. A boring was also continued below to the Branspeth or Brockwell seam by Mr Forster. The owners, with great foresight, have elected to operate 2 shafts, one on each side of the railway track and some hundreds of yards apart. In due course, when a link is forged underground, ventilation, transport and safety will be greatly enhanced. Will Dickinson, an able 26-year-old pitman, surveyed newly built Durham Street, the first long colliery row. Will was born in Jarrow and currently works at Branspeth Colliery, about 2.5 miles up the line, another colliery owned by Messrs Straker and Love. He had left his 25-year-old wife Elizabeth and his daughters Mary Ann and Margaret 4 years and 1 year at Branspeth Colliery. Mr Forster had engaged him to work as a sinker with him at Brandon Colliery. Will met William Garbett, 28 years of age, set on as joiner's labourer at 17 shillings a week. He came from Yorkshire. His 24-year-old wife Sarah, their 2 young daughters Mary and Margaret, and 3-year-old John Henry all occupy number 14 Durham Street. Families are migrating from outside the northeast into the colliery areas. There is a drift from the land. Agricultural wages are poor, ranging from 9 shillings to 12 shillings a week. Men from Cornwall, Lancashire, Yorkshire, Staffordshire and Derbyshire are moving into the new collieries. Scots and Irish are among the migrants. One historian suggests that Brandon derives its name from the Scottish and Irish abbot and confessor St Brandon. He was abbot of Clonfert in Ireland. Legend says that he flew through the air in his chariot. Another interpretation is that Brandon is from the Anglo-Saxon brun, that is brown, and dun meaning a hill. A third definition is Brawn's Den, from which a fierce beast is said to have roamed, causing great havoc and consternation among the inhabitants. Brawn's Path, now Branspeth, where the beast trod. The Viscount and Lady Boyne returned to their castle at Branspeth. They, with Honoured J.F. Amtel Russell, have spent the summer at their family residence at Stackaln in Ireland. A large horse-drawn carriage conveyed them the 400 yards or so to the castle. The railway company built a small station at Branspeth, here the train stopped daily. The day following the return of Viscount Boyne saw a gig leave Brandon Colliery on its sorrowful journey to Branspeth. It carried the remains of baby Samuel Routledge, the 4-month-old son of Robert Routledge of number 15 South Street. During the year, the Reverend Shafto baptised 3 babies born at Brandon Colliery. Glossary. Netty, cavity to hold household ashes, rubbish and excrement. Qualls, bricks 8 inches square and 3 inches thick. Baulks, squared timber. Heapstead, structure built with baulks round the shaft. Peck, 20 pounds in weight. Gig, a light two-wheeled carriage. Into 1858. A New Year turkey cost 7 shillings at the market in Durham. As the pitman's wage doesn't run to luxuries, a joint of beef at half that price will suffice. There's paraffin to buy at 2p halfpenny a gill. Candles for use in the home and in the pit are 11p a pound. Coffee at the same price finds favour. Tea at 2 shillings and 4p to 4 shillings a pound is beyond his pocket. Coal is now being produced more and more abundantly at Brandon Colliery. More hewing places are prepared in the Hutton seam. More hewers and putters are being set on. The main winning advances, determined to leave behind the shaft precincts. Hewing places which fork to the left and right as the winning moves forward are manned. Coal is constantly being hewed and moved in tubs by putters for transport to the shaft. Pillars of coal measuring 18 yards by 11 yards are left standing in the shaft area. These take roof pressure, likely to be centred on the shaft and ground designated for stables. Of the 6,000 or so acres leased to the colliery owners, 1/5 of the coal will be left in pillars, barries, etc. That's 1,200 acres. 1/10 of the coal will be left in for falls, casualties, etc. That's 600 acres. Estimated total to be left in 1,800 acres. This leaves some 4,200 acres of workable coal. Brandon Colliery, it seems, is assured work for a number of years. Tommy Jones, a 14-year-old putter and new arrival at the colliery, manoeuvred the empty tub into a small siding near Jack Scott's hewing place. Tommy's short, coarse flannel vest, sweat-soaked, clung to his frail body as he approached the hewing place. He expertly settled down on his hunkers. He avoided the water which had collected on the floor of the seam. Tommy, all of 5 stone in weight, manfully appraised his biceps as they pressed against his knees. "Have you a chow, mister?" Jack Scott deftly twisted a finger length from his supply of twist tobacco. After handing it to Tommy, he returned the tobacco to his stocking. There it would be safe and moist. The single candle spluttered. Tommy squirted a stream of baccy juice against the side of the tub. He was pleased with the chow and the unexpected rest. Jack Scott busied himself spreading the coal in his nearly full tub. Tommy watched the tobacco juice run haphazardly down the side of the tub and expend itself on the floor of the seam. Jack Scott stretched across the tub, which was barely clear of the roof. He could with some difficulty reach to the back of the tub. "What are you doing, mister?" asked Tommy. "I'm spreading to get more coal in," came the reply. Up to now, the standard weight of coal has been 8½ hundredweight, Jack Scott continued. A quarter of hundredweight has been added to the standard weight, making it 8¾ hundredweight. We are being paid 6p extra for every score of tubs hewed. Jack Scott, having added more coal, finished spreading. As Tommy prepared to take away the full tub, Jack said, "If the tub is less than 8¾ hundredweight, Mr. Love can have it confiscated, no money being paid for the contents." During May, Mr. Love directed that another ½ hundredweight be added to the tub of coal hewed. He has set the new weight at 9¼ hundredweight. This entails more frequent spreading of the tub to acquire the desired weight. Jack Scott and the other hewers are playing hell and working under protest, as no extra pay is offered. While George Mann, George Coulson, Archibald Anderson, William Summers and other coal hewers were seething over the added weight, Mr. Love, an ardent Methodist, presented £1,000 to the chapel fund of the Methodist New Connection. Mr. Love, a regular preacher, is well known in Methodist circles. A harassed husband, clad in vest and trousers with dangling braces, dashed urgently from the dimly lit colliery house. Down Durham Street's dark, rock-strewn waste he stumbled. He banged loudly on the rough, scantily painted door. Mrs. Wilson, the buxom, unqualified, but highly efficient midwife, answered his call. Some time later, an infant's cries heralded a new arrival into the street, a daughter for William and Sarah Garbutt. William had a huge fire going in the kitchen grate. 2 scuttles of small coal nestled on the broad fire back for instant replenishment. William, 29 years of age, was born in Yorkshire. So too was his wife Sarah, who was 25. Mary, 7 years of age, Margaret, 5, and John Henry, nearly 4, slept in their home 14 Durham Street, blissfully unaware of the family drama just enacted. William, employed as a joiner's labourer, earns 17 shillings a week. He pays no rent for the colliery house, whose owner grants him an allowance of small coal. The baby, tightly wrapped in a woolen shawl, was carried to Bransford, where the Reverend John Duncombe Shafto, the rector, baptised her Hannah. William and Sarah silently pray that their young family is granted immunity from the epidemics of scarlet fever and diphtheria frequently haunting the district. William Wilkins, fed and bathed after his 9-hour shift at Corleone, settled down in his 1 down and 1 up house in Railway Street. His wife Mary Ann had climbed the steep ladder to tidy the upstairs room. William, a tolerable reader, liked reading the Durham Advertiser, a popular weekly paper just reduced from 2p halfpenny to 1 penny for 4 large sheets of news. He and other pitmen reckon they have had a champion in the paper during its 44 years of publication. No time to relax. Will, we need some water. The rain barrel stood empty after providing his bath. Fresh water was required for household use. He laced up his boots, donned coat and cap, slung his scarf around his neck, grabbed a pail and set off for Farmer Hepworth's field. Shawled women, cloth-capped and muffled men and boys sporting knickerbocker breeches awaited their turn to collect water at the spring. Men cursed guardedly at the unhurried trickle. Bored youngsters, forgetting their errand, leave miscellaneous receptacles to lark about. Mothers wait patiently in the colliery-owned houses. Tom Stout and Jim Sedgwick had been sent to collect water after returning from school. They and 58 other pupils attend the newly built school at East Brandon, set just around the corner from Mr. Thornton's Bay Horse Inn. Mr. Hall is the new school's headmaster. He is also a collector of taxes. Mary Garbett and her sister Margaret, along with other colliery school children, are pleased. Hitherto they had walked to the Bransford Church of England School 2 miles away, which shares the Ann Dobison endowment with East Brandon School. Homeward bound after his long wait for water, William passed Mrs. Westgarth's Durham Street home. Mrs. Westgarth admired her new cottage mangle, its large wooden rollers turned by a heavy wheel set in an ample iron frame guaranteed halving wash-day drudgery. With 7 in family to wash for, she considered the princely sum of 30 shillings well spent. Mrs. Walker and Mrs. Wood, her close neighbours, share her delight. Being too bulky for indoor storage, its wood and iron body, supported on 4 small metal wheels, stands in the corner of the yard. A large sheet protects it from inclement weather. During September there was talk of strikes by pitmen from 5 counties for more pay. Although Brandon Colliery is remote, its workers, out of loyalty, could become involved. It is said that at some collieries men are working for £1 10 shillings a fortnight. This is subject to offtakes of 6 shillings and 8p, leaving scarcely more than 11 shillings a week for the support of a whole family. Ewers are fined half a crown for short tubs, further depleting their meagre wages. Prospects are poor for the coal trade. Soup kitchens have opened at Durham to help the poor of the district. 50 tickets cost 4 shillings and 2p. Each ticket buys 1 pint of soup. Will the immigrants from the rural areas find their utopia in the coal mines? The services of Arthur A. Philpotts, curate at Bransford, are in constant demand. Diphtheria and scarlet fever stalk side by side, claiming more victims, mainly the very young. Mr. John Straker, co-owner of Brandon Colliery, suffered the loss of his infant son Arthur. During November, diphtheria claimed 4 more young souls from the colliery rows. Elizabeth Broadbrent, 4 years of age, Sarah Routledge, 3 years of age, John Coulson, 2 years, and William Thew, also 2, were victims. Joseph Love, like his co-partner, suffered a family's loss. His infant daughter, Susan, died at Willington House, a large mansion some 3 miles from Brandon Colliery. On a happier note, 5 babies made the journey to Bransford during the year to receive baptism. They were Hannah, daughter of William and Sarah Garbutt; William, son of Thomas and Margaret Wilson, Thomas is a shoemaker; Thomas Jackson, son of Thomas and Elizabeth Dodds, the fathers of blacksmith at the colliery; Jane Ann, daughter of George and Jane Colson; John, son of Archibald and Margaret Anderson; George Colson and Archibald Anderson are Colliers. One feels sure that with whisky at £0.50 a bottle and sherry at 1 shilling and 8 a bottle, samples would be in evidence after the ceremonies. Sufficient coal is now being mined at the colliery to warrant frequent shipments to the London Coal Exchange. Twice during November, coal was dispatched to London, fetching 18 shillings and 6pence a tonne. Glossary. Hunkers, sitting on the heels. Chow, a piece of tobacco. Score, 21 tubs. Some collieries fix a score at 22 tubs. Playing ill, tempers flare and strong language is used. Off-takes, deductions from pay, house rent, house coal, fines, laid outs, etc. Short tubs, tubs the contents of which, after reaching the surface, have settled down below the rim of the tub, are deemed short tubs. A fine could be imposed on the ewer or even total confiscation of the contents. Into 1859. Thomas Rumley, aged 25, dropped the latch on the back door of number 31 South Street. He instinctively trod the dark street. A 9-hour shift as a coal ewer awaited him at the nearby pit whose heapstead pulsated. Tom's wife, Anne, aged 23, like Tom, was born at South Etton. They moved to Brandon Colliery from Nettlewers near Durham, where their daughter Margaret, now 3 years of age, was born. Tom's thoughts centred on his wife and daughter, as with cloth cap perched on his head, he mechanically crossed the long cloth scarf hanging round his neck, the ends of which he tucked under his trouser braces. His thick calico shirt, waistcoat and old jacket effectively cheating the January frost. His trousers, well patched, are drawn at the knees by lengths of string. Strong hobnailed boots cover thick woolen pit stockings. His bait of jam and bread, packed the previous night, nestles in the tin box carried under his arm. Precious cold water fills the tin bottle squeezed into his jacket pocket. Tom met William Hay, another coal ewer, strong but less experienced, at 19 years of age. Will was born in Yorkshire, as was his wife, also named Anne. They have a baby. Anna was born at Oakenshaw, another Straker and Love colliery, from which place they moved to Brandon Colliery, where they occupy number 6 Railway Street. Both Tom and Will, on signing an agreement binding them to the colliery for 12 months, were allocated a colliery house. Coke ovens, like so many giant beehives, have established themselves near the pit shaft. Gantries carry the coal to be tipped near their hungry mouths. Ewers like Tom and Will, with sweating, not hard muscles, send up the best coking coal. Sturdy Irishmen shovel the coal into the glowing ovens. Streets have now acquired an identity. There are 2 short railway streets, 2 South Streets and Durham Street. About 150 houses have been built and occupied. James Anderson left the village school on Friday afternoon. At 5 a.m. on the Monday he went to work underground in the Bay Pit. He had reached the manly age of 11 and started work as a trapper lad at 10pence a shift. Jim worked a 12-hour shift at his lonely job of tending a door. He opened the large wooden door through which putters brought their tubs. Wooden doors are installed to regulate the flow of air into the workings. Jim's work isn't hard. He descends first with the other lads. They are the last to ascend. His father, Archibald Anderson, a coal ewer, works a 9-hour shift, some 3 hours less than his son. On March the 13th, proud parents, William and Anne Summers of South Street, had their twin baby daughters christened, Georgina and Margaret, in the village church at Bransford. William, a coal ewer in the Bay Pit and a man of musical leanings, will celebrate the event. At the same time, he and his wife will take every precaution to safeguard the new arrivals against the twin scourge of scarlet fever and diphtheria still taking heavy toll in the county. The pitmen of Brandon Colliery, eager for reform, signed a petition. They, with other pitmen of Great Britain and Ireland, want an 8-hour day. They would like to see that children under the age of 14 work only half time. They say that coal owners should be obliged to use the patent safety cage, that a fund be provided by law to support disabled miners and the widows and orphans of those who have lost their lives in the mines, and that the machinery used in raising coals should only be allowed to work 9 hours a day. The train is an established and convenient form of travel. It stops at Brandon Colliery siding on Saturdays and Sundays. Passengers embark en route to Durham or Bishop Auckland. Families are catered for at the provision market in Durham. Potatoes are currently selling at 7p a peck. Beef and pork 6p a pound. Mutton is dearer at 8p a pound. A duck costs 1 shilling and 9p. Eggs are 18 a shilling. Dick helps with the weekend shopping. He finds it exciting taking the train ride to Durham on his fortnightly Saturday off. It is the highlight of his young life. Dick is 14 years of age. He works a 12-hour shift as a putter in the same district as his mate, 13-year-old Jim Anderson, who is a pony driver. They descend and ascend in the cage together. During the winter months they see daylight only at weekends, their shift being from 5 a.m. to 5 p.m. On most evenings, around 6 p.m, refreshed after a bath and a hearty meal, Dick seeks the company of his friends. They gather at the gable end of number 24 Railway Street, whose 5 raised stone steps provide welcome seats. Here they gather. They come from the nearby South Streets. Any sign of frost in the air, a warm spot is eagerly sought. The kitchen fire of the end house exudes warmth through the stone wall. Dick was talking to Mary Clark. Mary is 14. She helps at home, but hopes to start work in Mr. Smith's paper mill at Langley Grove, about a mile away. "What was your first cage ride like?" quizzed Mary. "There was a sickness in my belly, a bursting sensation in my ears, and worst of all, my heart almost jumped out of my mouth," answered Dick. "What's it like down the pit?" pursued Mary. "It's so black, when my light goes out it is really frightening." Mary learned that there were neither windows nor netties down the pit. Dick warmed to Mary. Late nights become a regular summer feature. Indoor heat becomes oppressive. Catching tunes emanating from Will Summers' concertina capture the listeners as they gather at the end of Railway Street. Men with their wives leave doors unlatched in the nearby streets to participate in the merriment. The continuing hot summer favoured outdoor activities. Sunderland played at cricket, a team chosen from Brandon and Branspeth. George Mann, a coal hewer and 37 years of age, plays for Brandon. His bandy leg's a symbol of his trade. George is deft with pick and cricket bat. His prowess with the latter helped his side beat Sunderland. Owing to the very hot weather and the seasonal decline in coal consumption, some pits are only working a 4-day week. Brandon Colliery pitmen are fortunate. The ever-hungry coke ovens keep the pulleys revolving. Coal mined at the colliery is excellent for coke and coke gas. Despite their full employment, Jack Scott, Isaac Parrish and the other coal hewers are acting the game. Mr. Love has added half a hundredweight to the weight of a tub of coal. The weight he expects from the men is now 9 3/4 hundredweight. There is no mention of extra pay. Hewers grumble as they sit over their pint in the colliery inn. They resent having to hew the extra coal. The men expect pay for the increase in weight, especially as coal from the colliery is currently fetching 18 shillings a tonne on the London coal market. During the year, the Reverend A. Duncombe Shafto, aided by his curate, blessed 15 marriages in the tiny village church. Only one couple came from Brandon Colliery. 6 babies born in the colliery rows were carried the 2 miles to Branspeth for baptism. They were Georgina Summers, Margaret Wilkinson, George Crozier, John Henry Garbett, Sarah Parrish and John Keel. Death struck 10 homes during the year, 6 infants under the age of 1 being among the victims. Glossary. Gantry, elevated wooden structure along which cone-shaped iron tubes on 4 wheels containing coal are shoved to the coke ovens. Patent safety cage, a recent invention which operates if the cage overshoots its mark. Safety levers are released which prevents the cage falling down the shaft. Bandy, bow-legged. Acting the game, the same as playing hell. Into 1860. New Year's Day. With a sigh, the rector of Bransmouth turned from his sitting-room window. The castle stood majestic, a stone throw away. A thick carpet of snow covered the approaches. He threaded his way through the castle grounds to the small church of St. Brandon, in whose grounds a small grave awaited the remains of Dorothy Robson, born in Brandon Colliery only 3 weeks before. Her father, 27-year-old Matt Robson, is a coal hewer at the colliery. On the afternoon, the rector's spirit lifted when he officiated the 3 baptisms. All the children were born at Brandon Colliery, where their fathers are employed. They were George, son of Squire and Margaret Brooke, Elizabeth, daughter of Christopher and Louisa Richardson, and Jane, daughter of Roger and Emma Hardman. Men are realising the strength of unions. Successful unions are being formed in Durham and Northumberland. They are still relatively weak until they join the Miners' Federation of Great Britain. Brandon Colliery has at the moment only a small union, not yet linked with the Federation. As more men and boys are employed, the union should develop. On June the 8th, Mr. Roberts, the Pitman's Attorney General, proposed a coal mines inspection bill. Men like Thomas Bell, with a 13-year-old pit lad's son, Isaac Parrish, whose 13-year-old son Thomas is a putter, Mike Williamson, whose 11-year-old son works underground, and Robert Innes, who has 12-year-old William working in the pit, applaud the new proposals. Mr. Roberts seeks a working day of 8 hours for boys between 8 and 14 years of age. He said that prior to the 1831 lockout, the shift for lads in the pits had been 14 hours a day and 9 hours a day for men. The dispute went on for 2 months till the men had gained a 12-hour shift for the lads and various other concessions. On the 22nd of June, Mr. Roberts added to his proposed bill of June the 8th that boys above the age of 10 and under the age of 16 be limited to 10 hours a day. As the lads worked a 12-hour shift at Brandon Colliery, Thomas Bell and the other fathers anxiously await the acceptance of the bill. The Act of 1860 was passed. Pitman had demanded a check weighman of their own. This request was acceded to. Unfortunately, most coal owners are slow to implement it. At Brandon Colliery, the banksman employed by Mr. Love checks the tubs of coal as they are brought to the surface. He is empowered to set aside any slack tubs. Coal is coming to the surface sufficient to warrant more frequent shipments to the London market. 2 shipments brought 18 shillings and sixpence and 18 shillings a ton respectively. Colliers say that coal sold on the market are not subject to set out and laid out. Why should theirs? Robert Tyndall, John Ironmarsh, Stephen Crozier, Jacob Brown, Thomas Suggett, Will Blades, Will Hartley, Martin Levine and their pit lads' sons, putters and drivers, helped make landowner and railway company more affluent. Since Messrs. Straker and Love leased the huge tract of land, the royalties of Bransmouth estate have leapt astronomically. The colliery owners pay to the estate a fixed sum of money for every ton of coal mined. By agreement, this coal passes over a portion of the Bishop Auckland line of railway, taking the carriage of coke and coal of 1 penny per ton per mile over an average distance of 8 miles. The railway company must derive an annual revenue from this source alone of upwards of £17,000. As the demand for coal from this district continues to increase, this annual revenue will be exceeded. It is estimated that since the Hon. J.F. Hamilton Russell succeeded to this lucrative estate, he has added upwards of £12,000 a year to his rent roll. Agricultural workers continue to desert the land where wages are very poor. There are a number of jobs at the colliery offering bigger wages. Most jobs qualify the worker for a house. The following are a few examples of wages paid at the colliery. Overman underground earns from 25 shillings to 33 shillings a week. Overman's assistant 22 shillings to 26 shillings a week. Deputy, the next grade, 3 shillings and 4pence to 3 shillings and 9pence a day. Ordinary wastemen are paid 16 shillings to 19 shillings a week. Principal wastemen, £1 to £1 10 shillings a week. Shifters and rollywaymen from 2 and 6pence to 3 shillings and 4pence a day. Ewers average 3 shillings and 9pence a day. Putters earn 2 shillings and 2pence to 2 shillings and 6pence a day. Drivers 1 shilling and 6pence a day. Trappers are paid 10pence a day. Housekeepers underground earn 14 shillings a week. Furnacemen 14 shillings to 16 shillings a week. Banksmen are paid 4 shillings a day. Blacksmiths and masons earn 17 shillings to 21 shillings a week. Wagon waymen on the surface, 2 and 6pence to 3 shillings a day. Joseph Addison, 43 years of age, hails from Dumbarton in far off Scotland. He has 2 jobs. During the day he works as a labourer. At night he and his wife, 40-year-old Hannah, run the new colliery inn. They are kept busy catering for the needs of the ever-expanding workforce. Will Dickinson and some 20 men celebrated the inauguration of the Foresters' Court Pride of Brandon, number 3333. The Foresters was founded to help the poor. Their aim is to help them financially and save them from the poor law. Will, being a public-spirited man, had contacted Joseph Addison, who joined the court. He provided a room in which to launch Brandon Colliery's first active society. A gig carried twins Elizabeth and Thomas Mann, children of George and Mary Mann, to their christening at Bransford. George is a coal hewer in the Big Pit. Jubilation was tragically terminated when the twins died 2 days later. No doubt George will long reflect on the cruel twist of fate as he sits on his cracked hewing coal. John Cale, John Minto, William Bowman and William Wilson, all lads from Brandon Colliery, landed themselves into trouble by playing football in the lane running to East Brandon. They appeared at Durham County Police Court. The case was dismissed, the bench having no desire to interfere with their amusements, but desired them, when at play, not to interfere with or annoy people. At the same time, at the Durham County Court, a labourer employed by Messrs Straker and Love claimed more pay. He is in charge of a colliery-owned horse and cart, and he empties the middens and ash pits. He receives 3 shillings a day for 3 days in the week, and in order to make up his wage such a sum as would support him, he had the privilege of screening ashes, which when screened, he disposes of to the neighbouring farmers at so much per load. Thomas Rumley, Will Hartley, Matthew Innes and John Wilkinson, all coal hewers, were among the pitmen who renewed their 12-month bond at the beginning of December. All were married men with young families, some of whom are pony drivers, others are helpers and putters. Most men are loath to leave their job and the security of a colliery house and coals. Some of the single men, more adventurous, elect to sign on elsewhere. "Good morning, ladies." "Good morning, Mr. Dunn," replied his neighbours in East Street. Thomas Dunn, replete in blue serge pit clothes, jacket, waistcoat, half-trousers fastened just below his knees by tapes, navy blue pit stockings and polished pit boots, strode towards the pit. His leather skull cap, polished black, with pig turned to the rear, shone in the wintry sunlight. His tapered yardstick swung with each measured stride as he swiftly covered the short distance to the pit. Thomas Dunn, a widower of some years, at 54 years of age, is the colliery's first viewer. He moved from Shincliffe near Durham. He lodges with William Dove and his family at number 19 East Street, the end house of a short row. William, at 41, is a joiner at the colliery and came from Wickham, near Bladen. Mr. Dunn is a respected gaffer. He descends the pit every day. The men know that he must implement the owner's wishes in everything related to the pit. Mr. Love, the colliery owner, moved from Willington into a new house just up the road from Durham Railway Station and Wharton Park. He named it Mount Beulah. His new residence is within easy reach of his colliery interests. Intense cold over Christmas froze the river weir at Durham. Robert Towers, James and Thomas Connolly, Jonathan Blackett and James Pickles, all young lads from Brandon Colliery, thought the 3-mile walk little price to pay for the exciting time spent on the lantern illuminated ice. Householders with gas and water taps found them frozen. On Christmas Day, John Green, only 3 weeks old, was carried the 2 miles to Bransford for burial at St. Brandon's. He made a sad total of 24 Brandon Colliery souls buried in the village churchyard during the year. Of that number, 16 were infants. 14 babies were baptised during the year. 7 couples from Brandon Colliery celebrated their marriage over that period, all 7 grooms being pitmen at the colliery. Glossary. Check weighman, one who weighs the tubs of coal when they reach the surface. Set out. When the tub is set aside, it is liable to confiscation, supposedly not attaining the required weight. Laid out. A fine is imposed on the ewer if the tub is laid out when it contains an excess weight of stone. Cracked, an essential part of the ewer's gear, a low wooden stool. Bond, the worker signs an agreement which binds him to the colliery for 1 year. Viewer, colliery manager. Into 1861. Early January brought heavy snowfalls. William Anderson, William Blades, John Garbutt, his sisters Mary and Margaret, Edward Parkinson, Mary Ann Dickinson and Mary Rain, all pupils at East Brandon's National School, were jubilant. Snow had blocked the 2 lanes converging on the village. 60 pupils revelled in the enforced holiday. Cold weather brought extra bonus. Some children were allowed the use of the chiffonier bed. The low bedrooms are reached by ladder. Cold penetrates the loose-fitting windows. At such times, a bed set before the kitchen fire is alluring. Most families possess a chiffonier. This is a folding bedstead resembling an ordinary chest of drawers or cupboard, with 2 doors at the front. During the day it stands tall against the kitchen wall. At night the doors are opened and the bed is lowered. Most children prefer the chiffonier to a bed upstairs. Continued on side 2. Will Dickinson, a tall 30-year-old muscular pitman, finished trimming his beard. Mary Ann and Margaret, his 2 daughters, born at Bransworth Colliery, some 2 miles away, long housebound by snowstorms, hungered for a walk. Eager to go, they showed impatience. The trio left their Durham Street home. Will thought that the lane leading to Langley Moor Inn was about the dirtiest in the North Country. For some 200 yards, the 3 travellers struggled to free their boots from the glutinous mud. He made a mental note of the inhospitable scene. On reaching Langley paper mill cottages, 6 one-roomed cottages occupied by paper mill workers and sited midway between Brandon Colliery and Durham, he found the highway flooded knee-deep. The River Brownie had overflowed its banks. As Will carried 4-year-old Margaret shoulder high, he reflected on the possibility of a fatal accident, as there was no fence of any kind to prevent anyone falling into the river. He made further mental notes. To avoid the 200-yard stretch of mud, they would, on their return, have to travel to Meadowfield and go a mile about by the Turnpike Road. Being a public-spirited man, Will intended, at an early date, drawing the surveyor's attention to the filthy and deplorable state of the road. On the credit side, Will noted that the owners of Brandon Colliery had made a good road from the low end of the colliery up to Brandon on the hill. Blood, sweat and tears are synonymous with colliery life. A fatal accident, the first during the 5 years' life of the colliery, occurred on Wednesday, April the 3rd. Charles Bainbridge lived 2 miles away at Neville's Cross near Durham and was employed as a screen hand at the colliery. He was riding on the wagons on the railway near the colliery when they gave a jerk and he was pitched onto the line. On seeing a train of wagons coming in an opposite direction, he made effort to get clear of the line, but tripping on the rail, the wagons came up and nearly severed his leg from his body close to the trunk. He was taken to Durham County Hospital, where amputation was performed, but he gradually sank and died the same night. The unfortunate young man, who had served some years with Mr. Arden, chemist in Silver Street, Durham, was only 22 years of age. He leaves a wife and child to lament his early death. During April, a national census was taken. Brandon Colliery in 5 years has a population of 671 in its 133 occupied houses. 10 years ago, when the last census was taken, Brandon Colliery was unconceived. At that time, the population of Brandon and Byshuttles was 525. Now it is 1,486, the increase being due to collieries like Brandon's with rows of new houses and large families. The Viscount and Viscountess Boyne returned home to Bransworth Castle after their winter sojourn in Burwarden Hall, their seat in Shropshire. As their train puffed its way through Brandon, a lean, pale-faced putter of 15 puffed his way behind an empty tub some 25 fathoms below ground. The place in which George Black had hewed was stowed off. As Will Dunn ran the empty tub into the hewing place, George shouted, "Get straight back, I'll fill this one straight up." Will Dunn knew that the other 3 ewes detailed to him would also be stowed off. He had one of those off days when outguns rate. He hurried, bent double, his sweat-grimed boyish face stinging from the heat of the candle secured to the tub. Smoke seared his eyes. His heavy boots slid on the wet floor of the seam. Icy water splashed his belly, showing between vest and oggers. A sudden jerk. The tub flies off the way, all four wheels. A solid, immovable wall confronted him. Of all the rotten luck, it had to happen where the roadway was at its narrowest, little more than the width of the tub. Will stuck his candle holder into a nearby prop. Swearing, he turned his back on the tub and tried to arse it onto the way. His struggles only succeeded in moving it an inch, the roof preventing further progress. Only one thing to do, get to the front of the tub and try to lift that end. Pieces of stone pack were urgently removed and bundled behind him. He crawled on his side past the tub. Oh God, he hissed through clenched teeth as a jagged piece of stone grazed his back, knocking off a scab healing from the previous week. Fill the bloody pit in and give the farmer his bloody field back, he screamed in agony as his rough vest touched the raw flesh. He suddenly felt all alone and forgotten. Having eased up the fore end of the tub, he had to pack small stones under the wheel while keeping the tub lifted. Stomach and leg muscles knotted agonizingly. Water squelched from his boots. He worked in near darkness. On feeling his sore lumbar region, he swore profusely. He crawled painfully and gingerly back and treated the other end in similar manner. He had leverage now and managed to lift the tub onto a loose 4-foot rail. The tub being pulled back a few yards onto a secure way, he fixed the loose rails. As he knotted the two ends of a broken bootlace together, a candle approached. George Blackett, dressed like Will, in rough vest and augers, shouted, "What's the matter? Do you want a hand?" "You're too bloody late, mister," came the reply, as Will, with lungs nearly bursting, trundled his way to the flat. Workers and their families are streaming into Brandon Colliery. On signing the yearly bond, family men are given a colliery house. John Carroll is 29 years of age. He's signed to Hugh Cole at the colliery. He and his wife Margaret, aged 24, were born in Ireland. They went to Seaton Colliery, where Mary, their 2-year-old daughter, was born. They now occupy number 19 South Street. It is a 3-roomed house with a small kitchen and a low attic, which is reached by a ladder. Attached to the house is a small, qualled paved yard. John Jefferson is another immigrant. He is 25 and was set on as a deputy overman. He moved to Brandon Colliery from North Shields with his wife, 21-year-old Jane, and their daughter Hannah, who is 2. Number 25 South Street is their new home. John Watson, another official just set on, is 50 years of age. He moved from Chelsea Street some 9 miles away. He and John Jefferson will take charge of Cole Ewers, George Madison, William Lighton and John Wilkinson, who have just moved to South Street. George Williamson also lives in the Long Street. George is 11 years of age and earns 10 a day working as a trapper lad underground. Thomas Stout and his family also settled in South Street. There are 5 pitmen in the family. 4 children attend the village school. Mrs. Stout also has a lodger, a single man of 23. She is kept busy looking after her large family. Hugh MacDermott, a 34-year-old coke drawer born in Ireland, helped Alexander MacDonald, the 20-year-old colliery cartman, load the colliery cart. The family and furniture had just arrived at Brandon railway siding from Bishop Auckland, some 8 miles away. 1 chiffonier, a table, 1 form, a large rocking chair, a cradle, and other goods of miscellaneous nature were piled onto the large flat cart. Pride of place went to the sparkling new brass and iron bedstead Hugh had just purchased for 12 shillings and sixpence. Jane MacDermott, also Irish-born, is 33 years of age, carrying Mary Elizabeth, their new baby, had moved ahead to open up their new home, number 16 Railway Street. Alice, aged 7, born at Bransmouth, and Edward, her 2-year-old brother, born at Unmick, perched themselves high on the cart, eager to explore their new home. Railway Street, only a few hundred yards from the siding, was soon reached. The hard, dirt-packed road presenting the powerful Clydesdale horse no problems. Alice and Edward were soon exploring their new home. Their mother quickly had a healthy fire going in the spacious grate. The previous tenant had left the qualled kitchen floor scrubbed clean. Hugh MacDermott and the cartman swiftly transferred the furniture. Alice and her brother claimed the settle. There they would be warm and out of the way. Mary Elizabeth slept cosily in her cradle. Anne, a Yorkshire woman and wife of a coal hewer, lived next door at number 15. She welcomed her new neighbours with pots of hot coffee. Thomas Gibbons, another newcomer, hails from West Rainton. He and his family moved to 21 South Street. Thomas was welcomed by the viewer at the colliery. 6 pitmen in one family guaranteed a colliery house. Dorothy Gibbons had a son, aged 12, who attends the National School at East Brandon. In just under 5 years of growth, the colliery now boasts 2 railway streets, 2 South Streets, East Street, Durham Street, and the Colliery Inn. Shops and more houses are under construction. More streets mean increased sales for the paraffin man whose small pony hauls the sturdy cart on which is perched the square paraffin tank. Oil for work costs 1 penny a day. Paraffin lamps for the home can be bought for 1 shilling and 9pence. Pitmen nationwide have long agitated against child labour and their conditions of work. On July the 1st, a new Mines Act came into force, which amongst other important provisions stated that no boy should go down the mine under the age of 12 unless he could produce a certificate proving that he could read and write, that boys under the age of 12 should go to school 5 hours per day. It also stated that coal should be weighed and that workmen should be at liberty to appoint a check weighman. Pitmen at Brandon Colliery look forward to the day when the Mines Act becomes fully operative. On Saturday, August the 27th, 40 members of the Court Pride of Brandon, number 3333 of the Order of Foresters, presided over by very proud Brother Dickinson, sat down to an excellent dinner supplied by Brother Joseph Addison. The Colliery Inn, aptly named as the pit shaft lies only a short distance from the parlour, was crowded on this, the first anniversary of Brandon Colliery Lodge. Mrs. Addison and her daughters, Mary, aged 12, and June, 10, helped serve the ample meal provided. The businessman for the south of England arrived in Brandon Colliery. He booked a room in the Colliery Inn for the night before continuing to Carlisle. From an upstairs room emanated noise from the gathering of foresters. The stranger sat in the smoke-filled bar, drank the strong beer, and chatted with the pitmen customers. He struggled to follow the pitmatic dialogue. Oil lamps smoked fitfully as they swung from the ceiling. Spittoons, sawdust-filled, liberally dotted the floor, their fresh black lead coating conspicuous against the scrub floor. Through the smoky haze he selected a free clay pipe from a box on the end of the bar. He saw men ascend from the pit a few yards away, probably horse keepers homeward bound after bedding down the ponies. As he paid his bill on the following morning, he confided in his host the belief that before his arrival he erroneously thought the pitmen lived like the ponies down the pit near their work. He moved on, an enlightened man. He had supped with the men, conversed with them, and had seen them come out of the pit. Men had moved to Brandon Colliery, men with business acumen who know that an expanding community needs goods of every description. Richard Preston, at 35, is a coal manufacturer from Lancaster. His wife hails from Middlesex. They, with their 3 young children, have just moved from Bransworth Colliery into number 1 High Street, their new shop and home. James Jackson Ferns, 45 years old, runs a grocery shop next door at number 2 High Street. He arrived from Northumberland with his 47-year-old wife Martha, their 2 sons, John 16 and Robert 14, help in the shop. A servant girl, hired at Durham, is 19-year-old Jane Bowes. The repercussions of war. During October, the price of tobacco leapt from 3p an ounce to 3p halfpenny an ounce. Many pitmen, both men and lads, chew tobacco as well as smoke it. Old women bring out clay pipes. They gather round the kitchen fire and bemoan the increase in price, said to be the result of the Civil War. A.F. Forster, giving evidence to the Educational Commissioners concerning all classes of Durham and Northumberland, wrote, "The colliers of Northumberland and Durham are the lowest in the social scale. An extraneous, rapidly increasing population, earning from 3 shillings to 5 shillings a day of 8 hours, with a dwelling and coal-free, living for the most part in the grossest sensuality, aggravated by the truck or tommy shop system. They dwell in isolated villages belonging to the coal owner of miserable and repulsive aspect, without pavement, drainage, or enclosure in front or rear. Few houses are more than 3 rooms. The consequence is that adultery is a matter of jest and incest is frightfully common and seems to excite no disgust. Language, even among women, boys and girls, is profane and filthy in the extreme. Attempts at improvement of dwellings are greatly frustrated by want of appreciation and liability to turnouts. The foregoing remarks brought the following reply from Archdeacon Thorpe of the College, Durham, a past defender of the working classes. I do not hesitate to express my utter disbelief in these assertions. Long acquaintance with the pit population emboldens me to do so, and I have a confidence that the voice and verdict of the county will be with me. For myself, I must say that the pitmen are a body long known to me, whose character and conduct command my respect and affectionate regard. William Dickinson, a Brandon Colliery pitman, took up his pen. To the editor of the Durham Chronicle. Dear Sir, seeing an article in last week's impression of your widely circulated newspaper headed Durham Miners, I'd like to make a few remarks upon the charges A.F. Forster Esquire has laid against them in his report to the Educational Commissioners. He stated that the miners of Durham and Northumberland were a set of men who made good wages. I will take that to be correct at some places, but there are other places in this district where good and industrious men cannot get what will maintain their families with the bare necessities of life. Mr. Forster says that they make from 3 shillings to 5 shillings per day of 8 hours, but it is more frequently 10 or 11 hours instead of 8 hours per day. A man with a family of 6 or 7 children, with only his own wage to maintain them, cannot live in such gross sensuality. There are hundreds can bear me out in this assertion, and as for living in isolated villages of miserable and repulsive aspect, without drainage or enclosure in front or rear, any of your readers who have visited Seaton or Brandon Collieries and many others will give the lie to Mr. Forster. As to adultery being a jest, I cannot find words of disapprobation for such a falsehood. I do not doubt but exceptional cases of adultery are committed both in Northumberland and Durham. But are there no other counties where adultery is more rife in them? If Mr. Forster looks to the middle and higher classes, to which I take him to belong, he will find adultery more common than among the working classes. And for incest, I would like to know if ever there was such a case brought under his notice in the counties of Northumberland and Durham. I wish that his moral, social and domestic character be as good as the generality of the Durham miners are. Mr. Archdeacon Thorpe deserves the thanks of the miners for his excellent remarks in their defence, which he has given from personal experience amongst them. Well might that gentleman say that Mr. Forster had put himself into bad company and sought out very doubtful sources for his information. If that gentleman is ever sent upon such a commission again as to investigate into the position of the miners, I hope he will make a more true statement and not bring us below the social position of the slaves of the disunited States of America and the Red Indians or the serfs of Russia. I hope these few remarks will bring some abler pen to bear on this subject. By letting this appear in your next impression, you will oblige your humble servant. Brandon Colliery, December 1861. On December the 29th, Thomas and Mary Suggett had an addition to the family baptized. Michael is their 5th child. Thomas is 28 years of age and is a coal hewer. The family had moved from Shildon. 9 babies were baptized at Bransford during the year. The curate, J.J. Bulmer, buried 3 Brandon Colliery infants. They were Jane Ann Bowes, 18 months, George Brooke, 15 months, and Anne Garbutt, 1 month. Glossary. Turnpike, gate across a road where tolls are paid. Screen, where the coal is tipped and the stone etc. is removed. Stowed off, there being a lot of coal hewed. Now't guns right, nothing goes right. Arse, the bottom of the spine used to give leverage when a derailed tub requires lifting onto the weir. Set on, employed. Form, a strong wooden plank set on legs, seats 3 or 4 people. Cradle, a long coffin-like wooden object in which the baby sleeps. It has 2 curved pieces of wood attached to its base for rocking purposes. Truck or Tommy shop, where workmen are paid in goods. Into 1862. Brandon Colliery, ever expanding both below and above ground, imported ponies from Galway in Scotland. There are a lot of new stables built near the shaft. Tired men trudged out by after their shift at the coal face. The sound of pounding hooves and rattling chains broke up the orderly file. Bodies clung to the side of the narrow roadway. Others found refuge in small recesses. James Anderson, Will Martin and John Bell, all established pony drivers, were likewise homeward bound. Their mounts, anticipating a meal of choppy, were galloping without guidance away to the shaft. As they passed John Watson, the 50-year-old overman, each one received a resounding whack on his rear as he lay with light extinguished and head tucked well out of sight, prone across his galloway. Police Constable Coverdale, at 27 years of age, is the colliery policeman. He moved from Castle Eden to lodge with John Dunn in East Street. He caught John Applewhite, a 17-year-old pitman who lives with his widowed mother in the same street, setting some trucks away at the colliery. He removed the wooden drag from a wagon which ran 40 yards and bumped into 2 coke wagons, knocking off some of the coke. The bench, after pointing out the folly and the danger of the act, ordered him to pay sixpence damages and the costs. The other incident involving court appearance concerns a stranger to the district. P.C. Graham, on night patrol, found Robert Carnes, a Rodney, sleeping in an empty coke oven at the colliery. Damage had been done to property by vagrants who were in the habit of taking up their nightly abode in the coke ovens. He was committed to prison for 3 days. Mr. Love added half a hundredweight and 4 pounds to the standard weight of a tub of coals. The total weight of a tub at Brandon Colliery now stands at 10 1/4 hundredweight 4 pounds. As no increase in price is offered, emotion is running high among the ewes. Tempers are almost at breaking point. Ewes at Mr. Love's other collieries are set to suffer the same imposition. Robert Tyndale, Archibald Anderson, Squire Brooks, George Madison, Richard Lamb, Featherston Wallace and Thomas Lamb, all ewes, as some of the men objecting to what they call the big filling. To achieve the weight demanded, the men are having to flatten down the coal in the tub when the height of the seam allows them. Putters, helpers and drivers have adopted the mood of the ewes and are playing hell. James Connolly, 14, his brother 12, his brother Thomas 12, Will Lighton, 11, Edward Parkinson, 10, Will Levine, 12, John Gibson, 14, Thomas Parrish, 13, John Innes, 15, Will, his 13-year-old brother, Matt Hurst, 16, Will Hurst, 13, George Hurst, 12, brothers, Robert Towers, 11, George, 13, George Main, 15, Robert Scott, 14, and 13-year-old Will Weymouth all realise that derailment of the tub means more weight to lift. The men await the day when their tubs will be weighed and checked under honest supervision. Mr. Love, by this latest addition to the weight, acquires 11 1/4 hundredweight of coal without cost out of every 21 tubs of coal the ewe fills. Pitmen, anxious for the well-being of their families, are seeking to safeguard their future. Fatal pit accidents leave widows and young dependents destitute. Pitmen in the county would like to see launched a permanent fund, a fund from which a weekly allowance would be made to any unfortunate dependents of such accidents. The need for such a scheme was forcefully brought home by the news of the fearful Hartley New Pit disaster on January the 16th, when 207 men and boys lost their lives. The calamity rendered 407 dependents destitute. Every colliery, village and town throughout the land has reacted to the tragedy. Funds are being raised for the dependents. Mr. Straker, co-owner of Brandon Colliery, immediately became one of a committee of 15 set up to solicit donations for the Hartley New Pit Accident Fund. Viscount Boyne of Bransford sent £50. Both landowner and coal owner have shown positive response. Shortly after the Hartley catastrophe, workmen of Brandon Colliery asked Mr. Dunn, the colliery viewer, to chair a meeting in the joiner's shop, which he had loaned for the purpose. The workshop was crowded with men, there to find the best means to help the destitute widows and orphans. Each man was asked to pay 1 shilling, every putter 6pence, and other boys 3pence per week towards the fund. It was suggested that any surplus arising from the fund should go towards the permanent fund for the near relatives of pit accident victims. Tom Dunn, John Watson and Archibald Thompson, the colliery cashier and local preacher, were appointed to collect the money. Ralph Jackson, Martin Lewins and William Dickinson were elected to help collect money from the men in their working area. 1 week after the appeal, Brandon Colliery workmen gave £11, 8 shillings and sixpence to the fund. Mr. Love, the Colliery co-owner, gave 10 guineas. In almost every home in the colliery, the topic of conversation is either the Hartley disaster or the proposed relief fund. Men forgot their own immediate grievances as they sat over their pint in the colliery inn. They had trouble slight compared with the Hartley colliery folks. The colliery headstock set only a few paces from the inn, a grim reminder of recent tragedy. Samuel Routledge and his wife shared great personal loss. Just 2 months after the death of their baby son Samuel, they suffered further family bereavement. Sarah, their 3-year-old daughter, died stricken with scarlet fever, which is still rife in the county. Their neighbours in South Street comforted them on their double loss. Mr. John Smith, a local capitalist, lived in an ample house. Langley Grove is set among the stately trees a few yards from the River Brownie, whose errant waters teem with trout. He employs 60 girls and 11 men in his paper mill at Langley, some of whom live at Brandon Colliery, their wages helping to support their families. On Easter Saturday, all families out to enjoy the brilliant sunshine walked to Langley Grove, where Mr. Smith had organised a steeplechase. During the afternoon, amid continuous sunshine, various races were run, the highlight being the steeplechase. Contestants, undaunted, splashed across the River Brownie and scrambled over hedge and ditch to the great amusement of the crowd. Business in Brandon Colliery is thriving. J. Jobson Madgen, a 23-year-old butcher born in Hetley Hall, requires an apprentice to the butchering trade. He prefers one who has been in the business. Mr. Madgen has a shop in High Street, along with Richard Preston and James Jackson Ferns, who are doing brisk business. These shops obviate the weekly journey to Durham Provision Market. Pitmen of Durham and Northumberland are jubilant. On June the 7th, they celebrate the launching of a miners' permanent fund. They know that in the case of accidents at work, their financial worries in future will be considerably alleviated. Collieries are asked to send 1 penny per man towards the management expenses. Subscribers to the fund contribute and silently pray that they never have to draw on the fund's resources. There's talk of winding up the Hartley Disaster Fund. By the end of June, the magnificent total of £78,647, 8 shillings and 5 pence had been collected for the dependents. The press loudly applauded the efforts made in reaching such a staggering sum. Workmen of Brandon Colliery have sent money on 3 occasions to the fund. The ideal summer helped along the cricket programme. Brandon Colliery in form beat Lumley on the last day of August by 4 wickets. George Mann and John Briggs handled their bats excellently. Mann scored 19 and Briggs scored 16. It seems they are adept with cricket bat and Collier was pick. George and John leave behind their grievances when they are called before the wicket. They and other men at Brandon Colliery are growing restive. Every week they complain about the big filling. They resent having to rock every tub of coal to escape confiscation of the contents. August, while good for summer sport, has been bad for the coal trade. Several collieries are working a 3-day week with no sign of immediate improvement. Brandon Colliery coke ovens, now covering a large area to the south of the pit, are keeping the men fully employed. The most notable act of the year was passed in November. The new law stated that colliery owners had to see that their pits had 2 exits. No one wanted a recurrence of the Hartley pit disaster when a pumping beam crashed down the only shaft and blocked escape. Christmas Day, which fell on a Thursday, was welcomed with the news that potatoes had dropped in price to 8 pence a stone. Beef and mutton cost 6 pence a pound. Good news too for William Dickinson and Coxon Gelson, who each had a son baptised. During the year, there were 7 Brandon Colliery babies baptised at Bransford. Out of 10 colliery folk buried there, 5 were infants. John Dunn and Catherine Westgarth, both from the colliery, celebrated Christmas by their marriage at Bransford. Glossary. Out by, going out towards the shaft. Galloway, slang for Galway. Rodney, a tramp. Headstock, wooden structure which houses the pulley wheels. Into 1863. Anna Garbutt, almost 5 years of age, complete with baked pork containing her sandwich dinner, grasped her 8-year-old brother's hand. John and Anna waved to their mother, standing in the doorway of their Durham Street home. Anna brushed a tear from her cheek and felt for the bull's-eye sweet that nestled in her coat pocket. She was making her school debut. Boots sparkled as did hands and face. She wore knee-length belted coat, black wool stockings, all new, the hallmark of a new starter. They strode the mile up the hill to the National School at East Brandon, where Mr. Hall had just retired as schoolmaster. The school requires a replacement whose yearly salary would be £60 with free house and coal allowance. Hannah would miss her daily enraptured gaze into the low window of number 8 East Street. The operation made possible with the help of a large stone recently carted from the quarry. Bull's-eyes at 1 farthing each, sugared fish at 2 for a farthing, both her favourites, occupied a prominent place in the window. Mrs. Beale's kitchen was a veritable treasure chest. A large jar of vinegar propped open the door, a round of cheese, a bag of sugar, tea, yeast, and a large roll of tobacco were but a few of the commodities stored into one small room. Owing to the industrial expansion with its influx of workmen, there is talk of Brandon and Byshottles adopting the Local Government Act of 1858. In the 5 years since the Act was passed, the villages comprising the Byshottles are in need of responsible people to run their affairs. 3 people are expected to be chosen for the task. There is a general depression in the coal trade. Brandon Colliery, among others, is only working a 3-day week. Pitmen and their families are hard put to manage on their earnings. Pitmen in the colliery are discontented. Working a short week adds to their troubles. They are playing hell about the big tub and not getting a just weight. Ugly rumours are abroad. Some diehards are shouting enough. There is talk of strong action being taken. Another Langley steeplechase day. On Saturday, April 18th, men forgot their grievances. Mr. Smith, the paper mill owner, again organised the event. Another beautiful day favoured the crowd drawn to witness the events. The first race was at 10 a.m. The River Brownie once again proved a formidable obstacle for most of the competitors in the main event. Men from Brandon Colliery and the surrounding villages took part. The North Durham Militia Band, to the crowd's enjoyment, played lively music to help make the second Langley steeplechase a success. Success favoured Bill Cartwright when he won the champion belt. He beat Jack Phillips in the foot race. He also won the £2 side bet. Short working weeks, discontent at the pit and smallpox have combined to create deep depression in Brandon Colliery. An epidemic of the dread disease is taking a heavy toll of life. 12 residents succumbed during the first 5 months of the year. Of that number, 9 were infants. On June the 20th, William, the 5-year-old son of William Snowden, became a victim. 6 days later, tragedy struck again. The disease claimed the baby of the family, 7-month-old John Michael. Will and Sarah Garbutt lost Anne, their 3-year-old daughter. Affluence has no defence against the dread disease. Mr. Smith's 9-month-old daughter, Anne Wright Smith, rests with the other victims in the village churchyard. Messrs. Straight and Love, due to the expanding property at their collieries, have had their houses, coke ovens and other pit property re-rated under the Parochial Assessment Act. The new rates are engine at each pit £50 each, miners' cottages £3.12 each, coke ovens where the smoke is not consumed are rated at £2 each, £1.10 to be charged where the smoke is consumed. This latter change in the rating is to encourage the reduction of smoke. A week of heavy thunderstorms, lightning and copious showers of rain over the district caused heavy damage to wheat and uncut grass. The weather did little to cheer the men in their present mood. Pitmen met in the colliery inn, others at corner ends. Most were unwilling to continue working under the existing conditions. Squire Brooke, George Madison, Richard Lamb and Will Hartley, all young colliers with families to support, left their work in the Hutton Seam on Monday 19th of October. Black, tired and hungry after their 9-hour shift, were grimly determined that the time for positive action to be taken had arrived. They had heard that the collieries at Willington, Bransmouth and Oakenshaw, all owned by Straker and Love, were on the brink of a strike for similar reasons. On the evening of the 19th, a gig travelled the 4 miles from Oakenshaw, where a meeting of colliery workers had been held. The driver of the gig, amid much gesticulation, announced the men had straightened enough collieries and were withdrawing their labour from tomorrow. Brandon colliery workmen immediately followed suit. Next day, October the 20th, knots of apprehensive women gathered, worried but totally behind their menfolk in demanding justice. Silence reigned at the pit head. Coke ovens cooled off as cinder drawers left their work to make a total of 308 men and boys refusing to work at Brandon Colliery. Of this number, 214 were members of the union. About 1,000 men from neighbouring Willington, Bransford and Oakenshaw collieries came out on strike. Offal and Shinkcliffe collieries, under the same ownership, being sympathetic to the cause, may follow suit. Mr. Love retaliated by having 12 of the striking pitmen arrested. Pitmen from the collieries concerned in the dispute crowded the police court at Durham. To their great delight, the 12 men were discharged. Triumphantly, a pigeon was immediately sent off carrying the good news. The pitmen continued their strike. Heartened by their first victory, they sensed some early outside support. The strike is over the men not being paid for alleged slack tubs. The banksman is the sole decider whether the tub is passed as full or slack. He works for the owner. The men want a representative at the surface to keep check on the tubs. They do not mind being paid lower wages for slack tubs sent up. Pitmen from the 4 collieries feel justified in taking strike action. They have named the stoppage the rocking strike. The name arises from the custom which obtains of setting out tubs if they are not level full when they come to bank. In order that this might be attained, the ewer walks around the tub and strikes it with his mail. He even shakes and rocks it so that jolting on the road out by does not settle the coal lower than the rim of the tub. If it settles below the rim, the entire content is liable to confiscation. This system is enforced in a glaring manner. The master's man is paid a commission on every slack tub he finds. His judgment could be at fault. The 1861 Act requires that the men have a weighman. This has been denied them. The demands of the men are payment by wage and an advance in wages. 4 days after the commencement of the strike, each striker received a printed notice. To the men of Brandon and Willington collieries, take notice that by your having absented yourself from our service, you have determined and broken your contract of iron with us, and we hereby require you to deliver up to us the possession of the cottage house which you have occupied as our servant before the 27th day of October 1863. And default of your doing so, you will be turned out of possession. Dated the 24th day of October 1863, the owners of Brandon Colliery. Mr. Love asserts that the true origin of the strike is an advance of from 20 to 25%. He further asserts that a good workman at any of his collieries can make 5 shillings and upwards in 8 hours, and that is the standard by which he fixes the price in every colliery. He has taken the average of 20 for the last 6 fortnights of Brandon Colliery and finds it upwards of £3 net to each man. The advance asked would increase the average to nearly £4 a fortnight. He goes on to say that any advance is impracticable, much less the demand of 20 to 25%. Finally, he states that however long the men may be able to stand out, the masters have no alternative but to resist. The owners offered 9 farthing per ton working. This offer the men rejected, as they claimed this would be halfpenny per ton less than previously. One cause of the strike, the men demanded a change from measure of coal to weight. They wanted the appointment of 2 men, one of whom would be paid by the men to see that the tubs were weighed and properly accounted for. Newspaper reporters condemned Mr. Love's action of ejection. They said that he must have a heart of stone. War could not be a greater misfortune to these desperate women and children. Men, women and children are being put out of their homes in the cold winter weather. Grace Anderson, 12 years of age, Will Suggett, 9, Ned Parkinson, a 12-year-old striker, and Will Levine, another striker at the age of 14, searched the spoil heap for remnants of coal which had adhered to the layer of bands sent out of the pit and had been rejected to the heap. Trespassers Edward and Will, wind blown, one eye open for PC Coverdale, set to with manly vigour. Household coal allowance now spent, they had elected to scrap for replacement. Work pulling out of shape tin dishes, battered and ejected tin bathtubs were commandeered to serve as sledges to skim the steep slope of the spoil heap. Amid youthful shrieks, the improvised toboggans carried the slope with consequent wear on breeches and boots. Grace would have to give account for a torn skirt. On entering its third week, the strike was reported on by a special correspondent of the Daily Telegraph, who dispatched the following. Deceived by a treacherous gleam of sunshine yesterday, I took an early walk along the pleasant road from the city of Durham to Willington, a distance of some 8 miles. About midway, a little past a spot called Langley Moor, I fell in with a party of the Brandon Colliery men, who are out on strike with the Branspeth, Oakenshaw and Sunnybrow pits. Conversing with them on the subject of their difference with Messrs. Straker and Love, their employers, I found these pitmen, whose decent Sunday dress, perfect cleanliness and general appearance of sober and careful habits belied the common notion of character in the mining districts of the country, as well informed set of workmen as any I have met in the gathering of the same number. They fell to discussing all the circumstances of their present position, but the calmness indicating their faith in the justice of the cause to which they pledged. They had heard no news that morning from Oakenshaw, to which colliery they had looked as a special source of information, it being a kind of headquarters. The men seemed well informed, having read the Newcastle Chronicle and Durham Advertiser. On walking away, they met a chap who had ridden from Oakenshaw in a gig. They broke into their own mystifying dialect. 2 days after the reporter's encounter with the striking pitmen, Mr. Love sent a letter to the public through the Durham Advertiser. He denied that there were 1,200 men on strike at the collieries of Messrs. Straker and Love. He said that the statement that the coke burns are underpaid on these collieries is an untruth. He suggests that the real secret of the conflict is whether the regulations of the colliery are to be carried out by the owners or the union committee. The latter is impossible. John Henry Garbutt, at 8 years of age, sensed a dramatic change in his home. His father, once kind and patient, was morose in his enforced idleness. His mother, showing facial lines born during the struggle to manage on a pittance, seemed divorced from the mother he knew before the strike. John Henry, his sisters Mary, Margaret and Anna, returning home from school in the village, carried broken branches from the near denuded trees in the lane, their coal allowance from the colliery being long exhausted. They had, with some success, gathered cinders which had escaped complete incineration on the fire heap, which had become their daily mecca. Spent cinders proved substitute for coal, their bath night became a lukewarm game. John Henry lived only a few yards from the now silent pit head. He missed the incessant clang of the pit cage. He missed too the beat of clog or pit boot, work or homeward bound. Out of work ponies brought to bank when the strike looked set to last indefinitely, revelling in their new-found freedom, their thick coats sound protection against the winter weather, scattered startled by excited human sounds. James Anderson, Will Layton, Will Parkinson and Tommy Dixon, all striking pony drivers, staged an impromptu rodeo, the spoil heap being an excellent grandstand for the less adventurous. Settle, Tiger, Bonnie and the other ponies were granted a reprieve on the arrival of PC Coverdale. Striking pitmen, in their determination to overcome injustice, organised a march. On Thursday, November the 13th, between 400 and 500 of the striking pitmen of Straker and Love's colliery marched through Durham bearing banners. The men went to Shinklet for the purpose of meeting pitmen from Offal Colliery, which had struck 2 days previously. Offal and Shinklet collieries are owned by Mr. Love. John Dunn from Brandon Colliery addressed the meeting. He said he was no public speaker, but their case made him more able to express himself. He said they had stopped work in order to do away with the iniquitous system under which they had been labouring for years, and which they were determined to banish from the country. He alluded to the system of tub rocking. He believed that the men were determined never to rock another tub for Mr. Love. They had been bowed down by a most unjust system, without any means of redressing their grievances, without any chance of asserting their just rights. Otherwise they had received notice to quit. They were anxious to raise themselves as working men and establish their position in society. They had not been treated as men. They did not want to be termed as paupers. They wanted a better state of things than had previously existed. The cause of the Union was spreading in all directions. They had shown by their conduct that they were a peaceably disposed class of men, and this he thought was proved by the fact that they had allowed their wives and children to be turned to the door in the most wretched and miserable weather. He was convinced that the masters would repent their conduct and eventually what the men required. But he was satisfied that the men would never return to work under the system of rocking tubs. The wonder was that they had so long submitted to the system. All they desired was that they should be paid for their labour, and he contended they were fully justified in the steps they had taken to obtain their just rights. They wanted justice, and the men would never raise a pick to fill a tub under the old system, and without they received extra pay for their extra labour. John Dunn's brave and spirited remarks drew applause from the pitmen present. Up to the beginning of November, a sad cortege had left the colliery rows almost at weekly intervals. To add to the depression, 30 souls had been buried at Bransford. Of that number, 25 had died in early infancy. For some, the journey to Bransford had been their only one. Life is becoming increasingly harder for the strikers and their families. No coal, little money which to buy necessities. Ingenuity is born through strife. Jack Brown's goat, Edward Foster's sow, Thomas Gibbons's rabbits, and Tom Gill's chickens are sacrificed. Men without money forsake the colliery inn. Rabbits mysteriously adorn kitchen tables. Field produce fills hungry children's bellies. Shopkeepers are good, their credit seems endless. Continued on side 3.